So the chart is not 50% of the students are unmotivated. The chart is 50% of the managers believe students are. And exactly to your point. So it's really not a question of whether someone is motivated, but what behaviors tell other people about you. Yeah, it's
Wait, hold on. The light changed
Why
on
does
it.
that happen?
I don't know. It's been turning on and off. I think it
Oh, did it go?
hasn't gone back on.
Yeah, like it got warmer, huh?
It got really warm.
Yeah, it was right when you paused and I switched it and then it flicked off. So
That's so weird.
Be like, employers of the past are visiting us.
I'm haunted.
Yeah.
You'll be haunted by...
That light was clearly made by an early career, a recent grad.
Welcome back to UNHIREABLE. So we are your podcast for an honest take on early career. Gesture spent the last decade working with students and employers, and we're here to break down the truth about how school doesn't actually prepare you for work the way that you thought it might. So if this is your first time joining us today, I am Maile Sue. I'm joined here with Kiera, Liz, Matt, and Kevin. And this is the UNHIREABLE podcast. So earlier at the beginning of November, UW held a parent and family weekend, which was where students got to bring their families onto campus. There was a bunch of events and things they got to do together. Got to go to the football game, I think, and just explore things on campus. And so Gesture, at this event, we gave our first live podcast, which I think was very interesting and definitely new for us. I don't know, how did that feel, you guys, to do a live podcast in front of a live audience?
It was definitely different.
I like it.
Yeah, it was fun. It's fun.
That's good. I think it went great. Hopefully, I don't know, maybe we can do some more live podcasts in the future. But during the live podcast, we talked about a recent article that was published in Intelligent. So this was titled, 1 in 6 companies are hesitant to hire recent college graduates. So it's kind of rough. But today we wanted to talk a bit more about this article and what it said about Gen Z, particularly since we are Gen Z. I feel like I have a stake in that, and address some of the real questions that we got from students and parents at this event. So I was wondering, Matt, do you think you can give us a little rundown about what the article said and the different findings?
Yeah, totally. Feels so much more familiar to be back here in podcast studio, but I like it. Article surveyed about 1,000 companies recently, August of this year, so just a couple months ago. 75% of those companies report that some or all of their recent college graduates were unsatisfactory. 6 in 10 companies fired a recent college graduate that they had hired this year. Just a breakdown of problems that they had with new graduates: lack of motivation or initiative, poor communication skills, lack of professionalism, struggles with feedback, inadequate problem-solving abilities. So some pretty large, broad indictments. And we can dig into what some of those things mean. But one of the things that came out when we were doing the live version of this, and I think to your point and question about Gen Z, is this actually a Gen Z problem? We know from our work in our past that it's not just a Gen Z issue. We'll dig into what that is. But Kevin, you gave some really good context about why this problem is actually bigger than a Gen Z issue.
Yeah, I think I understand why we like to describe things as connected sort of intrinsically to some generation, as if that's the first time we've heard it. But if that was true, we would not have had the conversations we've had for many years with employers. So we've been hearing this a long time. And I do think it probably is different now. And the pandemic certainly had an impact. All of these things: motivation, communication, professionalism, feedback, problem solving. We've been hearing these for years. It goes back to, I think we've talked about this on the podcast before, all the way back into the early 2010s when we began talking to employers about liberal arts and how we were preparing students. We heard about, the lack of a bias for action, self-directedness, and self-initiative. The inability to handle ambiguity, to need, very clear and specific sort of syllabus or assignment-like directions for things, and judgment, ownership. So we've been hearing these things for quite some time. So I think we can let Gen Z off the hook a little bit. At the very least, it's not unique to them. And as was the case in the past, it really is about school mindset for us. And so school is the problem. or at least a big part of the problem. And we saw that in externship.
Probably why we had to pause externship, right? So students showed up with what I would consider the most valuable resource we could get from mentors at Amazon and Microsoft, their time, and wasted it because they approached it like school. We've talked a lot about this in other podcasts, and you can hear us talk more succinctly about it, and give examples of what exactly happened. But showing up as students with those exact same things, lack of judgment, coming unprepared, not fully preparing and anticipating, even though we told them that explicitly time and time again, the teaching of it and the practice of it just never happened because school doesn't actually reinforce those things. So, and those were young millennials. That wasn't, so again, generationally, no.
Yeah, what I think was encouraging, so I think most people would find this article discouraging. It's a lot of bad news. It's kind of hard to spin that as positive. And I'm sure people can quibble about the methodology or about, how things were worded or phrased. I would have those same issues. I think lots of the questions were vague. It wasn't clear what they meant by things. But I don't think it's possible to spin this as positive in some way, to spin it as, there's actually not a problem.
No, there's a
if you
problem.
change the wording, it would be fine. So we clearly have a problem. And I think to me, it's good news in the sense that, like we said, it's the same problem that we knew. So it confirms what we thought, and that the pillars that we've been building on for early career of mission, solving other people's problems, of challenge and comfort with ambiguity, but also with failure and discomfort in learning, that growth is uncomfortable. And story. So I feel like those three pillars are. This article validates the fact that those are the things that we need to be working on.
I also think there was another data chart that was in the article that we didn't really talk about during the podcast. And again, going back to school as the problem, they started to get more granular about the behaviors that were problematic. So things like can't manage the workload, late to start work, inappropriate language, late to meetings, difficult to manage, hands in assignments late, doesn't get along with coworkers, delivers poor quality work. Those were all listed as issues. I don't know. I have definitely seen all of those things be observed by faculty here at UW, and students let off the hook. There are so many different ways that we're accommodating student needs, perceived needs. I mean, I think sometimes there are real issues, but, if faculty don't hold them to like rigor and deadlines and context in the way that employers expect them to, I mean, that's just obvious. Of course, there's going to be a disconnect between what is expected of you as a student and then what's expected of you as a professional. But the reality is, school mindset goes way deeper than that. It's not just the, transactional behaviors that happen between a faculty member and a student. It's how a student approaches everything based off of what school asks of them.
Yeah, I mean, I would have to say that I would be guilty of those things as an instructor.
I am too. Oh, yeah.
And and it goes to, what you're mentioning, like the way we define school as being about content. So if I have an exam and I really just want the student to learn the content, something comes up, they can turn in the next day, they're still going to learn the content. I don't care if they turn in the assignment. I just care about them learning the content. And so all the things that you mentioned, really this entire article is another way of describing school mindset. And the things that bother hiring managers are the things that work in school and work in some ways for faculty. Certainly that's not the intent of anyone teaching a class, that students turn in things late and we give them deadlines. But that's the path of least resistance.
Yep.
And sometimes it really doesn't matter to the content learning goals. And so we're like, well, why do we don't need to hold people to that? If it, I need an extra day on this, okay, that's fine, whatever, it doesn't matter. Because our learning goal in that class is not learn to manage deadlines, and in fact, students can do that if the consequences are significant enough, right? Most of the time. And but to your point, we're probably erring a little bit too much on the side of our content learning goals and less on the goals that of the things that matter to sort of life after graduation. I remember it used to be the case that people would describe in a cynical way the value of college is that you just learn how to show up on time. The value of school is that you just learn how to show up on time.
Right.
Okay. Well, apparently that is no longer even the cynical view
They're not coming
because
on
you
time.
don't even learn how to show up on time. But that evolution, reflects a shift in our emphasis on, well, let's just focus on learning and where people are individually. But the consequence, like you said, is that then they're not prepared for a change in expectations.
Yep.
Don't you think that if students got a campus job in their first year, and actually got feedback, wouldn't this solve this problem? Do you think there are fewer students that are working? And do campus jobs get people a little further along in this?
It's a good question, and it kind of ties into some other questions that we got about where people would learn something other than a school mindset. So student organizations or work
Leadership.
in general.
Yeah.
And I think the answer is sort of it could, right? It depends. And this is actually true even of early career full-time work, that you could graduate and our sort of narrative and our general belief is that school mindset is hindering students when they're in school, but we have smart students and then they graduate, they get a job, and then they're going to struggle in their first job or two. But in those jobs is where they'll learn these things, and then which is, I think, generally consistent with the experience we have. Our students do get jobs, and they, but they can have a crappy first job too.
Yeah.
So I think the main takeaway is you can do any work in a school mindset.
For
It
as
can be
long
schoolwork,
as possible.
As long as it works. Exactly.
Yeah.
There are many tasks in the world that you can accomplish with a school mindset, including full-time work. And there are jobs that really are just school mindset jobs, even though they're done with school. And they're not the jobs we're trying to prepare our students for. But back to your question, could a campus job be? A campus could be.
Depends on the
We've talked to
manager.
people who said they look for customer service experience as a good predictor. We've also all had customer experiences where the person on the other side of the counter was crappy at customer service. So they were doing a customer service job in a school mindset way, which is just, I asked for something, we don't have it, I can't help you any other way. That's not what she meant by customer service, right? That's not the Nordstrom level of customer service. That's okay, we might have some, I won't insult a company that might sponsor us someday. So some company, bad customer service, I think we recognize is actually just school mindset work.
Yep.
That's doing customer service in a school mindset way. So I think the answer is it could, but not necessarily. And there still is a lot of work. And if, it's not the case, I think that these numbers here are too high. They have to include some people who had work.
Yeah.
So we're not just seeing people who had work and people who didn't. And so that goes back to the question of what is your job? What is your student organization experience? Everything you do could be done in a school mindset way or a mission mindset way. School itself could be done in a relatively more mission mindset way, and you could even get more personal challenge out of academics than is the case. But certainly work. I think that goes to I think there was a question about internships, right? And I don't know if I remember the wording of the.
Yeah. Someone asked us, are traditional internships no longer helping students shift identities from student to professional? And if so, why?
So this kind of goes to your question, right? And we've talked about this a lot. I think an internship could be a place to develop. Well, most internships are opportunities to develop and use mission mindset. But many internships you would not have to, just like school itself. And so the short answer is it is possible to do an internship in a school mindset way, in which case you will not grow at all. And I think we've talked before about internships, to me, are a way for higher ed to get out of doing this work, because we just kind of blame it on the internship, and then employers can blame it on us. Everyone's blaming each other. But I got to say that I think even in this article it says somewhere that it would be it's the job in some sense of an employer to help students grow, which I don't agree. No, as an employer, no. That your job is to pay you to do a job, and so it's the job of college, which happens to be our job. So it is our job personally,
Right.
So in gesture, I think that is the difference. That if it's part of our job to prepare people, then teaching and giving opportunities for growth and feedback, that is actually part of our work. A regular internship, you're just hiring somebody to do a task, and that's not your responsibility to help them grow beyond that task. I think it's great if you take that on and help do some of the university's job for it, but that's a cost, and so.
Which is why a lot of companies didn't want to do the externship program anymore,
Well,
right? It was hard for them.
This is so fascinating. So a few years ago, because one of the complaints we were getting from the mentors at our externship sites, sort of late, unengaged, withdrawn. So we're like, okay, you got to show up, right?
Yeah.
Especially, and so we had one pre-mentorship meeting. Kiera and I have talked about this, and Kiera has definitely talked about all the ways that we've tried to train up these students before they got to an Amazon or Microsoft mentor. But we were just said, you have to be on time. It's so crucial. So we were explicit about it. You must be on time. I mean, this goes to one of the points they were just talking about. We had a meeting here on campus, room, guy shows up. I can understand like a couple minutes here or there. The guy shows up like 10 minutes late. I said, you know what? It's unacceptable behavior. You're out of the program. Kicked him out. I don't know if how that landed with everyone in the room. I hope they realized that it actually does matter.
Yeah.
It matters if you show up late to a job. I will tell you, though, the feedback I got, students complained to their mentors at Amazon and Microsoft how cruel we were.
Oh my gosh.
How unprofessional and mean we were.
What did they say? How do you respond to that?
Well, I remember sitting there because there was a mentor, this is at Amazon, who said, they said that, someone was fired for being late. And I'm like,
Yeah. It's a low bar.
what,
Yeah.
is just late always accepted? Is late work always I mean, it's just so challenging because, again, no one wants to be the bearer of bad news. So to your point, we're blaming each other. Internship providers aren't doing it. School isn't providing it. And then when someone does do it, we tried it one time that way, we got backlash as well. I think it's interesting to think then, okay, how do you teach the importance of, how do you get a community of practice of what something like being on time means? Again, we can talk about this in other podcast episodes, but I think that points to, what Gesture is doing with the students that we're working with now and moving forward. Like you understand the relationship between two professionals and how that unfolds. And I think what was really hard is that an easy one for students to do, get there on time. To your point, we used to say that was the benefit. And if they just can't do that, and then when someone calls that on it, they feel like they've been morally wronged. We're just dealing with, again, issues that are much larger than us.
Although I wonder if that person who was fired, they probably never showed up late again.
Okay, one more tiny little side story. Another person who showed up late for another one.
After that?
Yeah.
Wow. Okay.
Different section.
Okay.
But at that point, we were moving on to some group activities, and there was just no way for them to integrate. And I said, I'm sorry, it's just not going to work. You've missed too much. Like the project has moved too far without you. And she was sort of crestfallen and, she wasn't angry. But a couple of days later, she wrote to me and she said, I totally understand. And actually that moment was a moment I've never actually thought about in terms of how much consequence can sit with something as simple as showing up on time. So again, I think we're on the right path, but school isn't helping us.
Oh no! I mean,
In this space.
People can show up whenever they want, and I think there's so much leeway in how you engage.
Right.
Like it's so flexible.
Yeah, and we've had to do that in boot camp as well, fire people. And the same thing, I think that ends up being the moment of learning and the takeaway. And if that person takes that memorable learning moment away, they might be getting more value than other people who went through boot camp. And so we've accomplished our goal really of
I agree.
and I think understanding that's really what we're after. Like, what is a transformational moment or a moment you're going to remember or make an impact? And just telling people stuff or teaching people stuff is not necessarily going to accomplish that. Otherwise, we wouldn't have these results.
Right.
I mean, at no point is any faculty member anywhere teaching people like you should not be motivated, you should be unprofessional, you should be unorganized, you should have poor communication. I mean, you actually need organizational skills to get assignments done. But how then can more than almost 50% of them not be doing well in organization? So there are lots of reasons why we, that behavior is okay or works. And I think the point for us is that we're not saying that behavior, you shouldn't do that in school. I mean, you're paying, you make your choice, do whatever you want. The problem is that students don't realize that is not the behavior that will necessarily work when they graduate. And if they did, then they can choose to behave that way in school when they're the customer, in essence, or not. I mean, that's also not the best way to learn, but they can make a choice, and then they can make a choice and work as well, rather than just not even realizing. I mean, to your point about the student who, on reflection, right? And that's what we hear when they get fired usually, like, I didn't think about that way. So that's how that lesson, gets learned, and in a place where it's safe. It was not a job. It was not credit. You didn't lose any money, and that's actually what we're supposed to be doing in college is on that. So now they're not going to make that mistake when they get to a full-time job. Whereas other people, maybe even people who were in who went through our externship,
100%.
who didn't learn that lesson, they came on time, but they didn't learn that lesson, and then now they're going to be behind. They should have been late and got fired. They missed their opportunity. And even when we did our sort of full-time gesture thing, somebody came late. We didn't fire her because we had a whole month to go, and it was for credit.
Right.
But she missed the whole first exercise, and we locked her out of the room initially, and then she ended up being the star, one of the stars of the whole program because that light switched it on for her, So I think that lesson for us that we do have to create a space for that where they can fail safely, and then you can leverage that. But not everyone wants that, even in the safe space.
Yeah, hearing all this, it's interesting being Gen Z. I think it's a little scary to think about, but it was just reminding me of when I did the gesture internship here. That was honestly like my main internship experience, and I think it was definitely different than maybe other internships that students get. But it's interesting to hear your perspective from this more professional outside school perspective when, as a student inside, I think I probably embodied a lot of these things. Like, I was really worried about being late, so like I don't think I was like, timeliness maybe wasn't my issue, but looking at lack of motivation or initiative, I think for me, looking back, I think it may seem like I lacked some initiative in some ways, but for me, like, remembering back when I came into gesture and had these projects, or I was initially helping out with boot camp, and so helping Matt, manage students and things, I think I was just didn't know what to do, so it came across as not having initiative, or because in school I was told what to do. So even though I wasn't trying I wasn't trying to not be motivated or be unprofessional, but I just was so out of my depth because I was unprepared from school that it definitely came across that way. So it's interesting to see that didn't try to do it on purpose. A lot of these students are probably not trying to, and but then looking back, it makes me feel bad. Like, oh my gosh, I was definitely a similar student who probably had poor communication skills then, because it just looks different in the work world compared to an internship. But it was all things I was definitely not trying to do on purpose. But it's interesting that it still comes across that way, even if I wasn't trying it.
I think that's a really key point. That we look. There's a chart here. Beliefs hiring managers have about recent college graduates, and mentioned motivation as one, and kind of self-direction, like you said. And so the chart is not 50% of the students are unmotivated. The chart is 50% of the managers believe students are, and exactly to your point. So and I think we see this when we talk to students. They feel like they're motivated. Oh, it's somebody thinks they're not motivated, like that. that's their problem. Well, actually, it is the student's problem if somebody thinks you're unmotivated. But it's really not a question of whether someone is motivated, but what behaviors tell other people about you. And those signals are the ones that do not matter in school. It's okay to not look motivated in school because you might still get an A anyway. You might still be doing your work. But impression management, as we've talked about, and how we manage what other people think of us, that is, in fact, how managers are interpreting that and the judgments they're making about. They're thinking the person is unmotivated when they may just not be able to demonstrate through their behavior motivation, self-direction. That's the bias for action that we heard.
Well, and also, Maile, just to give you a little peace of mind, I think showing up and being self-aware and ready to get feedback around those things probably was a tipping point within the gesture internship, which is what we're trying to do with our new interns that we're just starting to work with right now, is as long as they keep showing up and as long as they're self-aware to take the feedback, they're going to be able to grow because you're going to get things. And there are ways that you can just, again, in a community of practice, do this that feel more natural and sort of evolutionary as you grow into this identity because it has to happen over time. It has to happen repeatedly. I think that did happen. And it doesn't have to be this direct. I think, going back to the earlier example of showing up 15 minutes late, it's just so concise. Like you didn't show up on time versus you lack motivation. Oh my gosh. I think some of these things are really, really nebulous in terms of what that actually means and how that is embodied in people, which is why it's important for us to be very concrete and discreet about what we're trying to do, our intentionality within the practice here, which, again, we can talk a lot more about in other episodes. Actually, we'll get some of our interns to come on an episode. That'll be even better.
Also, thinking back to Gen Z or college graduates lacking a space to get this type of feedback. Liz, you asked the question about part-time jobs. I mean, I had a couple different part-time jobs while in school, and I remember the only people who really got feedback were the ones who were doing obviously badly, like really struggling in the job, and maybe struggling is not even the right word, just not trying or
Not doing the job.
constantly showing up late. Yeah, not doing the job. Yeah. But the people who are kind of middle ground, people might complain about them behind their backs. I mean, I'm totally, part of the problem because I got into higher level positions where I also wasn't delivering strong feedback. It was a lot of complaining, and those people probably never knew that they were lacking in those areas. And I mean, it just goes to show that even if you do have that job, some people might learn from it, but the other half might not at all and never get feedback about what they're doing wrong in those roles too.
And back to the original question, just like an internship provider, faculty are going to choose, hey, you know what? Are we going to get to the same endpoint with or without this? Yes. What's going to cause me the least grief? Let's not bring it up. So if someone shows up to an internship or a part-time job, is reliable enough to do the basic aspects of what's asked of them, yeah, there's probably no signs of motivation there, but are you going to question that? Are you going to give feedback on that? Is that just opening up a can of worms that you have to then deal with?
Yeah. Well, especially student roles where people are turning over every few years.
Right,
And
it's temporary.
like, how much energy do I want to put in making this person better? I remember that as like a student manager. There were employees that I was like, oh my gosh, like don't just stand around. Like you shouldn't just be doing the basic list of what is required of you in this role. Like you need to be actually like moving your body at all times and thinking about how to fill the space. But no one, I mean, unless you said that to them, same with school, right? Like you don't know what you're missing if you just like do the basics. Like you don't know what could be if you actually leaned in and went above and beyond. But you see those students in class, like you see the ones that stand out that are like, oh, like I did this extra reading or I actually did the reading. They stand out. So, yeah.
I remember one of the moments at my job at the candy store in U Village. I had just started there, and I was like always a quiet person, and so I didn't really like greeting customers. But I remember the one time I got really strong feedback as one of the girls said, hey, by the way, people are noticing you're not greeting customers. You need to greet customers. And at the time I was like, oh, wow, I was not expecting anyone to give me such direct feedback. I wasn't angry or anything, but I wasn't expecting it. But I mean, it totally changed the way I looked at things and made me better at the job. So I actually haven't thought about that moment in a long time, but this is making me think about how that was pretty rare working there, getting such direct and honest feedback from someone.
I had a similar moment in my student job. I remember I had like a night shift for housing and food services. It was like cleaning the kitchens, and there were cameras on, and like students would be in there studying. And I remember my manager with that quarter was like, "We noticed that you don't seem as happy when you're at work." And I was like, "Wait, but like no one is here." And she's like, "Students are here. Like you're making an impression on them. So like you need to look like you're enthusiastic about work while you're here." And I was like, "Okay, good to know."
Wow.
But, you know, I just figured, like, no one's here. I'm just taking out the trash. Like, does this really matter? But it mattered even then. So, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I think the point you made here is a good one, and it kind of shows up here, which is that feedback is effortful. Like it takes effort and time, and you know, in the case of a business or your internship or your full-time employer, then that's money in some ways, right? Like that's a job. It's not in their job description, or at least they may or may not do it. It's effortful to do that. So, in school, in theory, like Matt said, this may not be actually happening, but in theory, that is our job. And so it is reasonable to expect feedback, whether you're at the bottom or the middle or the top, right? That everyone can grow, and you would need feedback that is appropriate to your level. But to the job and internship question, that is, you know, that's often more effort than it's worth especially if you have high turnover or somebody, you know, like why would I even bother, you know? And if you're doing enough, getting by, it's going to be a big, you know, a difficult conversation to have, or, you know, I don't know if you're going to handle it well, or I don't know what to say, or there's so many reasons like, okay, forget it, I'm not going to. And then, so then you wouldn't grow from that, and you would come away thinking that's how you do the job and how everyone expects that work to get done, when in fact that was just too much trouble to give feedback. Like you said, but it's not that they don't think about, it's not that they don't change their impression of you. You think, oh man, that person is,
Let's just buy our time.
yeah,
Let's just
okay,
wait.
they'll be going soon enough. Whatever, it's not worth trying to help them get better. And it's only worth it when they're doing so badly that you're like, I have to step in, otherwise, you know. And then possibly on the high end, right? That's where I remember one of the people at that employer event saying that, you know, I really look for people. The other thing I look for besides bias for action is people who attract mentors to them, people who make you want to mentor them. And so the very high people, you know, high performers and whatever that means, those are the people then that I will spend the effort on helping that person grow. And then I'll spend the effort on the bottom person because otherwise I'm going to have to fire them. But in the middle, I just don't have the time for that. And so most people are in the middle. Nothing wrong with being in the middle. The answer is not you have to become the answer is you have to find a way to challenge yourself if you're in the middle, and to seek that out and to become someone that someone would want to mentor. Because that doesn't mean you're the highest performer. It means that you have the right mindset.
It's kind of related to actually one of the questions. I don't know if we wanted to go into this, but one of the questions we got from the session was that sometimes new hires can be discouraged from breaking the mold, trying to be that top person that come across as arrogant or insubordinate. But how can you reconcile this with taking initiative and wanting to be that person that someone wants to mentor first, and then, instead of getting lost in the middle?
Yeah, I think that's a great question. And when it came up when talking to employers, it often comes up under the category of judgment, like because there is a judgment call there, right? Like when are you being too assertive? When are you like kind of going outside of the, like thinking you know more than you know, or that you are claiming more authority than you have, or whatever. And then when on the other end, you don't want to look passive or apathetic or whatever. The short answer on how to approach that is mission, right? Like which problem are you solving? And if you're genuinely trying to solve the other person's problem, then it's not about being right or wrong. It's about, I know what we're trying to work on here. And then that I think is less likely to come across as arrogant. To me, arrogance implies, besides just being I'm so glad to have the beeper back, but the arrogance is really about solving your own problem, right? And that's like, I want to show you how smart I am. Okay, so that's a problem definition problem, not a, just acting like a problem. I mean, if you really are I don't know, you're just going to be that way, and we should just avoid hiring that person. But
There are some companies that like to hire.
that's
So-
true.
So
Company. So that you should go work there, and then
Yeah.
you'd be like promoted.
yeah, we
and,
all know which companies those
yeah,
are. Too,
Totally.
so.
And so that, yeah, just find your right home, find your
Yep.
people. Don't hang out with them. But
Welcome home.
totally. We've been waiting for you.
This segment's just gonna be beep 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 beep.
I think there is a judgment thing in there, but there's also a legitimate that comes with experience. Like, where are the bounds of what? But I also think that if you are focused on I think most of it is mission, though. So most of the crossing the line doesn't happen if you're not solving it. And when you're solving your own problem, it's all bad. Like, there's no
100%.
upside if you're just solving your own problem.
Well, to the wording of the question you just asked from the parent, right? Taking initiative. If your initiative is solely based on you trying to make yourself look better or elevate your standing amongst the group,
Right.
that has nothing to do with their needs, right? So I think that's where initiative probably got its negative connotation for this, in that we've all seen people take initiative only for the betterment of themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And I think it's where initiative and ambition and all those things start to get a little muddy. Like, are those good things or bad things? Because
Yeah.
right, because we don't
Yeah.
we talk like, oh, they're so overly ambitious. You're like, what is that?
It can be off-putting, but like curiosity, I think.
I think those are great examples that we get. We head into the wrong direction when we're focused on those words, because just like you said, they're kind of vague, right? So let's take the example of initiative, which the employers definitely pointed out, right? It's here, and we've heard that many times before. And they mean initiative to solve my problem. They do not mean initiative to solve your own problem. They do not mean initiative to solve somebody else's problem. They do not mean initiative to clean your house or take care of your dog or those are all, that's fine, but that doesn't matter. They don't. So we take that as a person who takes initiative, and that's wrong. It's the person who takes initiative about a particular problem. And so to your point earlier, looking like you have no attention, we will make a judgment if somebody's quiet. But if they're quiet and doing what they need to get done, that's not a problem. It's quiet and not doing anything, or just doing things that are unrelated to the work.
Solving someone else's the wrong problem.
That's the problem, exactly. And so I think curiosity, we often use that also, especially in academia, as a stand-in for I want curious people. We don't actually want curious people who are curious about things that I don't care about. Like if somebody came to the job and they're like, "Oh my God, I love snails so much," and they just wandered off and where the hell is so and so? And oh, he's outside finding snails. Like, what is he finding snails for? Which I'm really using the beep for a lot this time. I feel liberated. But
There's no families in here
is
watching.
that totally
your cabin.
exactly? This is what it really would have been. No, but but I feel like that's what's going through my mind. That those are the words going through my mind. So, hey, that's interesting. Why is I thought we were doing work, but he's not. He's interested in but he is showing curiosity. I'm like, no, where the is he, man? I'm not paying him to look. So I think curiosity. That's what we like to talk about that in academia, because that actually is a school skill, and I mean it's relevant to school. And but again, it's actually only relevant in the class. If I'm teaching sociology and you're like, oh my God, I really love the planets and black hole. I'm like, okay, that's great, but I don't care. This is not. That's a different class. You can do that, but I'm not going to give you a better grade in your sociology class because of that. So I think understanding what is the problem in the sociology class, what is the problem in the physics class, what is the problem at work, that and not thinking it's a personality trait. Curious person is not useful. Curious person curious about the work we're doing, that's useful. And that takes the pressure off the person. You don't have to become I am now a curious person about everything. It is just, I'm a person who understands the context. What are we trying to do here? What is the problem we're trying to solve? And then curiosity is, let me explore that. Let me understand the big picture. Let me understand how things are connected. Who else is going to be influenced by this? Who can I work with? Who can I help? That's what they mean by curiosity, expanding the scope of that problem, but the right problem, not curiosity about yourself, which is, I mean, if you're really just curious for personal, then maybe you might become a good academic.
There you go.
Because that drives deep engagement into a topic. You just got to make sure that that enough people want to know about that topic
There you go.
to give you a job. But I think that's also, we talk about problem solving as one of the things that school does. Well, if the only kinds of problems that school is solving are like worksheets and essays and term papers, that is problem solving. It's just school problem solving, or that class, or that, right? And so yeah, it does. I think it really does come down to, like we've said, which problem.
Okay, I think we'll do one last question from the audience. It was, how do UW students compare to their peers in other schools nationwide in terms of employability or lack thereof?
Mm-hmm. So we've talked about this before. Everyone can chime in, but I think our critique of school is definitely not about UW. It is about school in general. So not about any I think some version of this is true at every school with not much variation. And it's also true in K-12 in different ways, which we don't really talk about here, and I don't really feel like I have a lot of expertise about. But I definitely do not think this is a UW problem. It is a little, it's different in liberal arts than in professional schools, but it's still a problem in both.
Yeah. I mean, the one thing that saves UW sort of, that maybe puts us at an advantage, because UW is more elite, it's harder to get into than a lot of other schools. Just the same thing to go to schools that are more elite than us. We've said if you get into Harvard and go to Harvard, you're fine because Harvard has already screened for so many different things, right? So many talented, motivated, capable people are applying there. Just like here, it's a different version of it though. So we have probably a higher hit rate just based off of us being a more elite university. But that said, the schoolness of UW is the same. I mean, the schoolness problem is the same at elite and less elite schools. So that, again, doesn't let us off the hook, and it doesn't really help us in the long run. Especially when you take, this is sort of our experiment that's happening right now. The students that we're working with are just starting their first quarter here at UW. First year students. We don't know where they're going to land in terms of aptitude or academic success, and those are all to be determined. They were all motivated and, admissible, so they got in here, so they've had some performance that's been verified. I think now it'll be very interesting to see where that lands in terms of what happens during their time here in school. Is there a way that Gesture can intervene in terms of practice with some folks and not let some of these behaviors that we know become problematic and reinforced by school and student practice, school mindset? Can we stave that off with them? Can we actually get them to start thinking about a different practice, understanding mission earlier, and have a different outcome? That's our goal.
How hard could it be?
Oh, just close to impossible, but that's why we keep showing up every day.
Want to hear more from Gesture? Check out the rest of the UNHIREABLE podcast on YouTube and Spotify. For even more content, follow us on TikTok and Instagram at gesture_UW.